Good morning from day 4 at Cannes 2024. I'm Chris Guilfoyle, the president of SeeHer, the Gender Equality Initiative for the Association of National Advertisers. Our mission is to increase the representation and portrayal of women and girls in all content, media, marketing, advertising, and entertainment, to drive business growth and transform society and culture now and for generations to come. And it's my great pleasure to be at Stagwell Sport Beach and to have my friend and colleague from Getty joining me. Please introduce yourself to our friends.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you and with all of you today. My name is Jacqueline Bourke and I am Senior Director of Creative and I head up our creative department for EMEA at Getty Images. And for those of you who may not know who Getty Images is, we are the world's leader in visual communications.
And leaning so heavily into all sports.
Yes.
But specifically women in sports.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to dig into that a little bit today.
Yes, so we have long been a passionate champion of the representation of all women, girls and female identifying individuals in sport. There's a huge amount of work to be done when we think about the legacy of visual storytelling for female athletes in women's sport. There's long been a history of breaking through gender barriers just to even be seen to participate and to be able to participate within a sport.
Well, and we know that a picture is 1,000 words. So can you share with me what have some of the issues been in visual representation of women athletes and sports, and how has Getty looked to push past those barriers to create a more equitable opportunity?
So not to simplify it, but I think I'll start with just 2 points. Often we say with, generalization, you get some rationalization. So if I start very simply, I think there has been a massive challenge to close the visibility gap for true gender parity when it comes to really showing those visual stories around female athletes and the challenges that they face in women's sport. I think number 2 then is really looking at what are the stereotypes that have been really over-relied upon. Now, I have the great, honestly, privilege of working for Getty Images for 13 years as a researcher who really analyzes what do media customers actually download? What are the patterns of stories that they actually tell around female athletes, and how has that changed over time? And so we've seen a lot of shifts, very interesting shifts.
Well, I love the shift that I've seen. And frankly, I think not only do you recognize what's needed, but you also curate as to what you think they should need. And we've seen this shift from beautiful women with perky ponytails with not a bit of sweat or dirt. And I know that Getty has pushed the barriers to truly show women in their full grit of the game, right? Dirty, sweating, colliding, just like male imagery would be shown on and off the field. So congratulations on that.
So I think what's interesting there is that in itself can become a stereotype, and I do want to call that out a little bit, but it is an evolution,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But I do think for us at Getty Images, what's really important is, number 1, listening to female athletes across all types of sports disciplines, which we do. And number 2 is actually listening, which they want us to do, to consumers, to fans, and to, let's say, non-fans who have the potential to be fans. And really understanding, well, what do they want to see? And we've just got in some really interesting research about sports visuals that connect with women, that would really push them into participating in the sport, like motivate them to it. And what I can honestly tell you is we're not, as we know, we're not all the same. And women from different regions want to see different types of sports visuals that will actually motivate within the sport.
Different sports visuals, different body types, different race, religions, abilities,
Yes.
right? The sports gamut is come one, come all.
Yes.
And it does not look like just one thing.
No. So, for example, with women in Europe, we're seeing that they really want to see in sports visuals ages. all types of ages, and index is very high. For women in the UAE, they really want to see visuals of people with disabilities, or as they call it, people of determination. For Saudi Arabia, women there really want to see teamwork. For America, it's very much about body shapes, so different types of body shapes, types and sizes. So it's really interesting to us to see, and we'll continue to track that through Getty Images Visual GPS, where genuinely we survey a minimum of 7,000 plus consumers in 25 countries around the world, consistently on average every 3 to 4 months since 2020.
Well, and that research is incredibly valuable because often we get a piece of creative and it just gets translated by country. And what we have heard here is that it's important to swap out your image. Use resources that are available so that you can connect with consumers in the most authentic way. Kudos on that research.
And what I will say then is it's quite interesting to understand then the educational piece that female athletes actually want to do with audiences. And so for us, we've really seen over time visuals changing where female athletes are leading cultural conversations about mental health, for instance.
Yes.
When we think about, we're about to come up to the Olympics in Paris very, very soon. We're all excited about that. But when we look back at the last Olympics, two images really stood out that was most downloaded by media customers around the world that we really hadn't seen when we analysed year after year, different types of sports visuals for women. But what was interesting was it was very much around Simone Biles, as we know, who introduced the twisties, but did such a phenomenal conversation starter from a very genuine place of what does strength look like in sport? And that vulnerability is actually a strength, and putting mental health before performance is actually a strength.
Yes, yes. And the ultimate supporter of her team.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Which is fantastic.
And Naomi Osaka is another great, phenomenal female athlete who's really been leading conversations there. And we're seeing that is having an impact on what we need to visually capture on sport. And when I think about sports visuals, historically, you often think of the 3 Ps. I'm making it very simple, but it's often personality, power, and perseverance. But how those visual stories actually get told now from a place of authenticity is key.
Personality, perseverance,
And power.
and power. I love landing on the power. And I wanted to ask a question about supporting stakeholders in the industry. How do you champion to break down stereotypes and move visual language forward? And I know Getty is a wonderful, engaged partner with SeeHer.
Yes.
We've done our inclusive visual storytelling guide, which we are able to workshop together for brands and media companies. But talk about the supporting of the stakeholders.
So we, since 2018, have put together our Women and Girls in Sport guidelines. Now, I always say it's a live, thriving document because it's with the ongoing collaborative conversations that we're having with the industry, with sports rights holders, with brand sponsors, with female photographers behind the camera, with female athletes, with fans, with the consumer insights. But essentially what it is doing is really pulling out and understanding, number one, as we've just talked about, women are not one homogenous group. And athletes, female athletes, are not one homogenous group. And there are often stereotypes around, for example, and we've spoke to athletes directly where they'll say, I always feel like when I look at my male counterparts on a team like cricket, they have a range of emotions that they're asked to express, let's say, in a traditional headshot for a sports rights organisation. And yet I'm being asked to be positive and positive and positive. We talk to rugby players and they're like, oh no, we don't get asked that. We're very much asked to look fierce and to look strong. And that's not necessarily the direction we actually want to go. So with the data-backed insights that we have that really power the Women and Girls in Sport guidelines, I'll give you a very kind of recent case study that we have, which is with the PWR, or the Premier Women's Rugby in the UK. We worked with what I honestly, genuinely feel is a very bold and courageous CEO, Belinda Moore, who wanted to launch the PWR last November. And I had been talking to Belinda when she was with golf in a former career. But the key goal here was really, she wanted to really show the diversity and inclusiveness of the PWR around female athletes all up and down the UK. So we decided to really look at the creative process and really understand, how do you center the female gaze of the athlete so that they can come in and actually, in a shooting environment, bring their authentic selves. And one of the most interesting pieces of feedback that I always remember reverberating was Shauna Brown, great rugby player, would say to us, I can reel off now very quickly the 4 poses I've been asked to do all over these years when I come in to do a headshot. And I want to do something different. So we created a series, and it's called Power Differently, which is really looking at the individuals of the players and the stories they wanted to tell. And for me, what was quite interesting in terms of bringing their authentic selves, they didn't want to wear their kit. So think of a classic headshot. They didn't want to wear their kit, and so they didn't. And so we had fabulous storytellers. From Abby Ward, who's the first female player that has been invited back post-baby to play for England and is benefiting from the RFU's maternity policies. She had, was 11 weeks after having given birth on our shoot.
God bless her.
And it was wonderful. And what we began to see was, they went from really looking to show classic rugby poses in a very graceful way. They really subverted the stereotypes. And for me, and what was really important was A, it was 100% powered by women, the entire collaborative process. B, that the female athlete's gaze was centered in the creative process. And then C, which I think is very fundamentally important, and I think the CEO did a wonderful job, and I asked her on the set, was give the female athletes the final say on the visuals that they have helped to create that will actually go out as part of the campaign. And that is a powerful step forward.
It's unbelievable. And representation in front of and behind the camera is
yes.
what drives the greatest level of
Yes.
success. As we wrap up here today, what's one takeaway? What still needs to be done from your perspective that others can take away and drive action in their own work?
I think ultimately the COVID pandemic, which it almost feels funny sometimes to me to say it now because it does feel like we're turning a corner. Mm-hmm. I'll knock, and not wood, but anyways. But I do feel that the sports industry seeing such disruption going through the pandemic, that the holistic health benefits of sport has really become all important to consumers out there. And so it's really understanding from an intersectional and inclusive lens, how do you truly look at how consumption models are changing around sport? So we look at, for example, Gen Zs. They are completely disrupting consumption. And yet that does not mean they do not want to be involved in sport. We find that for a quarter of Gen Z consumers, they're now telling us the competitiveness of sport is not attractive to them at all. And actually what they're leaning into more is looking for different social, collaborative experiences around sport that they can share with their friends and their family in real life, online. So it's an interesting space to look at. Yeah. So for me, the takeaway really is it's how do you truly, with the authenticity of stories you can tell, how can you really reach as many women and girls and female identifying individuals as possible, especially when you think about the drop-offs at puberty, you think about the drop-offs at midlife. There are so many stories that have been untold that could genuinely have a powerful effect.
C-suite women, 96% of them played a sport. I encourage all of you to invest in women's sports. It's great business and it fuels the next generation of executives for our industry. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.